The morning of October 14th, 2025, began with a quiet cellular alert that would ultimately delete my entire family's financial footprint from the public grid before sunset. I didn't waste a single second screaming at the people who had spent my entire adult life treating my hard-earned assets as their personal safety net. I simply opened my laptop and allowed a cold, automated legal trap to execute them in real time. By the time they realized that a bloodline obligation means absolutely nothing to a federal banking algorithm, the keys to their own home had already been permanently revoked by the state compliance board. My name is Iris Thorne. For 12 uninterrupted years, I have built an ironclad career as a senior risk auditor for an international commercial asset firm, working 80 hours a week to secure my absolute independence. When I was 24, I independently purchased a stunning 5-bedroom mid-century modern estate valued at $825,000, entirely through my own personal savings and investments. My parents, Arthur and Eleanor Thorne, along with my older brother, Leo, always viewed my financial discipline with a strange, passive-aggressive resentment. Leo was the perpetual golden child, a man who spent his 20s crashing through failed business partnerships and maxing out high-tier credit lines, only to have our parents constantly drain their own savings to keep him afloat. To my family, my success wasn't a source of pride. It was an unlocked treasury they felt entitled to raid whenever Leo's reckless choices caught up with him. The ultimate breaking point arrived while I was sitting in a high-security compliance meeting downtown, monitoring a sovereign corporate transaction. My phone vibrated on the oak table, displaying a blunt, unapologetic message from my father. The text stated that because Leo's wife, Chloe, was expecting a child and their current apartment lease had been terminated for non-payment, they would be taking full possession of my residential property by the following afternoon. I stared at the glowing pixels, a wave of absolute, freezing clarity washing over me. They hadn't asked for permission, nor had they considered where I would live. They had simply decided that my $825,000 house was a communal family asset. I immediately stepped out of the boardroom into the glass corridor and called Arthur. The moment he answered, his tone carried the insufferable, mocking confidence of a patriarch who assumed his authority was absolute. When I demanded to know how he could authorize an invasion of a property I had solely owned and paid for over the last 12 years, he simply laughed directly into the receiver. He stated flatly that a single woman had no logical need for a 5-bedroom estate, declaring that the house belonged to the collective family identity now because a new baby required immediate luxury space. He added that he had used a hidden spare key from my kitchen to grant the moving crew full access, advising me not to cause unnecessary family drama over a settled issue. I didn't argue, I didn't cry, and I didn't give him the satisfaction of hearing the outrage brewing beneath my chest. I hung up the phone, walked straight to the garage, and drove across the city with a calculated, silent precision. When my car pulled into my quiet, upscale neighborhood, my grip tightening on the steering wheel, a massive commercial moving truck was parked directly across my manicured front lawn. Leo was casually lifting heavy crates out of the vehicle and placing them into my garage, while Chloe sat comfortably on my front porch swing, sipping a beverage she had taken from my refrigerator. My parents stood by the front door, acting as if they were welcoming guests to their own private resort. I stepped onto the asphalt, walking up the driveway with slow, deliberate steps. Leo noticed me first, his entitled smirk instantly locking into place as he wiped the sweat from his forehead. He patronizingly told me that I needed to relax, claiming that they would figure out a minimal utility contribution once they were fully settled into the master suite for the winter. Arthur stepped forward from the doorway, crossing his arms arrogantly and telling me that family solidarity came before my individual selfishness. I didn't speak a single word to validate their excuses. Instead, I unlocked my phone and displayed the active emergency dispatch dashboard of the county sheriff's department, alongside my digitally verified corporate property deed. I looked my brother dead in the eyes and gave him exactly 10 minutes to reload every single item back into that commercial truck before the state authorities arrived to process criminal trespassing charges. My mother immediately began shrieking from the lawn, accusing me of being an ungrateful, cold-hearted monster who was willing to traumatize a pregnant woman over mere bricks and mortar. Arthur stepped into my personal space, sneering that the police would never interfere in a private domestic living arrangement between biological relatives. They truly believed that the concept of shared blood would protect them from the reality of property law, completely oblivious to the fact that I had spent my entire career learning exactly how to weaponize systemic compliance. Exactly 9 minutes later, the high-pitched wail and sirens echoed down the quiet street as two marked sheriff cruisers pulled up to the curb, effectively pinning the moving truck against my driveway. Uniformed deputies stepped out, holding the gold-sealed emergency eviction orders and unauthorized entry reports I had electronically transmitted to the precinct during my drive over. Arthur tried to confidently walk toward the lead officer, putting on a grand display of parental authority as he explained that it was a simple misunderstanding within a private domestic living arrangement between biological relatives. The deputy completely ignored him, cross-checking my driver's license against the digital land registry on his tablet before turning a hard, unyielding gaze toward the moving crew and Leo. The officer announced loudly that any individual who had entered the structure with an unauthorized duplicate key was currently committing a Class A criminal trespass. He stated flatly that if every piece of furniture wasn't completely removed from the garage and the commercial truck wasn't off the perimeter within 5 minutes, immediate arrests would be processed for breaking and entering. Chloe panicked, bursting into tears as she scrambled back into the passenger side of the truck, while the hired movers, terrified of corporate liability, began frantically tossing the heavy boxes back into the vehicle. Leo's face turned entirely white, his hands shaking as he was forced to drag a heavy velvet sofa back down the concrete driveway under the strict, loaded gaze of the armed deputies. Arthur stood by my brick mailbox, his fists clenched so hard his knuckles turned white, glaring at me with absolute hatred. He hissed that I had permanently destroyed the fabric of our family for a piece of real estate, telling me that I was officially dead to them and that I should never expect a single soul in the bloodline to look at my face again. I stood on my porch, watching the massive moving van violently shift into gear and speed down the road, followed closely by my parents' sedan, leaving deep, muddy scars across my grass. But my family's ultimate mistake was assuming my counterattack ended with a simple property eviction. They had completely forgotten that their own lifestyle was entirely dependent on my corporate financial signature. 5 years ago, when Arthur and Eleanor wanted to secure their high-end coastal retirement condominium, their decades of disastrous credit management and outstanding personal debts had caused every major commercial bank to reject their loan applications. Desperate to maintain their high society image among their peers, my father had practically begged me to use my private real estate investment corporation to act as the primary structural guarantor for their $450,000 mortgage. I had signed the document under a very specific ironclad conditional clause. Any documented legal liability, police investigation, or verified asset threat initiated by the borrowers against my primary holdings would grant my corporation the right to immediately liquidate the protection contract without prior notification. While standing on that driveway watching Leo struggle to reload his boxes, my fingers were already moving rapidly across my laptop terminal from the front seat of my car. I uploaded the official sheriff's trespass dispatch log, The recorded text messages from Arthur explicitly confirming the forced illegal entry and a formal corporate notice of immediate guarantor withdrawal to their lending institution, Integrity Capital Trust. The global banking system moves on cold digital calculations, completely indifferent to family dynamics or parental entitlement. The moment a high-tier corporate guarantor vanishes from a subprime mortgage, the back-end servers automatically flag the entire loan structure as an unmitigated material breach. By 3 p.m. that afternoon, while Arthur was frantically trying to squeeze Leo's furniture into a cheap, rural storage unit, a certified legal courier arrived at their coastal condominium. The document he handed to my mother wasn't a warning or a request for a mediation meeting. It was an absolute acceleration decree from the bank's Central Compliance Division. Integrity Capital Trust was demanding the immediate full repayment of the remaining $380,000 outstanding balance within 30 business days, or the retirement villa would be subjected to an automated civil foreclosure auction. My phone rang continuously over the next hour, my father's name flashing across the screen with desperate frequency. When I finally answered, the arrogant, patronizing patriarch was completely gone. He was weeping uncontrollably into the speaker, his voice cracking with pure terror as he explained that the bank had frozen their entire home equity line and placed a public foreclosure notice on their front gate. He begged me to call the executives at the bank to fix the mistake, asking how I could leave my own elderly parents completely destitute on the streets over a simple family disagreement. I told him calmly that since he believed property boundaries didn't exist among relatives, I had simply allowed the bank to treat his debt with the same level of communal access. I informed him that he had exactly 30 days to find a new multi-million-dollar corporate entity to back his retirement, or he could move into a cramped rental apartment with Leo, hanging up before placing every single family contact on a permanent block list. The next morning, a high-security commercial team arrived at my estate, completely dismantling the old manual deadbolts and installing an advanced biometric facial recognition network, reinforced steel frames, and high-definition perimeter cameras tied to a private armored response dispatch center. I sat on my quiet, sunlit balcony, sipping my morning tea while looking down at the pristine, empty driveway. My family spent my entire life operating under the assumption that my independence was a harvestable resource they could consume whenever their own bad decisions caught up with them. They tried to weaponize a milestone like a pregnancy to force me into silent submission, but they ended up learning a permanent, devastating lesson about the nature of true ownership. My home remained exactly what it was always intended to be. A flawless, unyielding fortress that no amount of family manipulation could ever breach. The visual pattern of an empty, secure driveway became a daily reminder of the price of my absolute peace. Over the next several weeks, I watched through the encrypted security interface as the downstream effects of the financial liquidation systematically dismantled Arthur and Eleanor's standing in their social circles. The coastal retirement villa, which they had used as a backdrop to boast about their superior lifestyle to neighbors and extended relatives, was officially listed on the public foreclosure database. The news traveled rapidly through our family network, prompting a wave of secondary phone calls and text messages from aunts, uncles, and distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, all attempting to shame me into reversing my corporate position. I ignored every single attempt at reconciliation. When my Aunt Margaret attempted to corner me at my corporate headquarters under the guise of delivering a personal family message, I had our building security team politely escort her off the commercial premises. I had spent 12 long years funding my own existence without a single hand extended to help me, yet the moment I enforced the boundaries of my own asset pool, the entire family structure labeled me a clinical outcast. This pattern of behavior only validated my cold approach. They did not care about the ethics of property invasion. they only cared that the fountain of unearned capital had suddenly dried up. Arthur and Eleanor were ultimately forced to sign a voluntary surrender deed for the coastal condominium to avoid a permanent public bankruptcy filing that would have destroyed their remaining liquid assets. With nowhere else to go, and with Leo completely unable to secure a traditional residential lease due to his catastrophic debt profile, my parents were forced to move into a low-tier, two-bedroom suburban apartment on the absolute edge of the industrial district. The grand family legacy they had tried to protect by stealing my home had vanished entirely into thin air, replaced by the grim reality of shared close quarters and fixed monthly expenses they could barely afford. Julian and Chloe's relationship began to crack under the intense weight of their new financial limitations. Without my 5-bedroom estate to use as a luxurious backdrop for their upcoming child, and without Arthur's continuous stream of corporate siphoned allowances to fund their consumer habits, the illusion of their perfect family life completely evaporated. They were left living in the second bedroom of my parents' cramped apartment, surrounded by cardboard boxes that they could no longer afford to place in private storage facilities. Every single luxury item they had attempted to move into my garage was either sold on the secondary market to cover their immediate moving debts or repossessed by the original vendors. I watched these developments from a detached, analytical distance, continuing to advance my career within the risk management sector. My corporate entity expanded its holdings, acquiring 2 additional commercial properties in the downtown district, further solidifying the financial wall between myself and the people who shared my DNA. I realized that the concept of family is often used by the reckless as a psychological weapon against the disciplined, designed to make you feel guilty for protecting the fruits of your own labor. By removing the emotional static from the equation, I had simply allowed the numbers to do the talking, and the numbers never lie. The final closure came when I received a formal notice from the state registry indicating that Arthur had attempted to contest the original emergency eviction filing through a minor civil court petition. Because my real estate firm held an airtight biometric record, an electronic timestamp of his admissions via text, and a pristine corporate filing history, the magistrate dismissed the case within 12 minutes of the initial review, ordering Arthur to pay the full legal fees incurred by my firm. It was the absolute exclamation point on a battle they had chosen to fight, without realizing they were completely outmatched from the very first step. Navigating the complex architecture of personal success requires an absolute acceptance of a difficult truth. Human entitlement is an insatiable force that expands to fill whatever space you refuse to defend. When you dedicate your life to building stability through quiet, unglamorous discipline, those who live recklessly will never appreciate your hard work. Instead, they will view your security as an unfair surplus that they have a natural right to claim. Real sovereignty means understanding that the emotional currency of familial guilt has zero value when measured against your actual material and legal rights. Protecting what you have built demands that you never allow sentimentality to soften your parameters. When people mistake your peace for passivity, the most absolute resolution is to step completely out of the equation and allow the cold, unyielding weight of their own financial actions to teach them the true cost of accountability.